Okay, let's take a deep dive into a single, really intense chapter today. We're zeroing in on Matthew chapter 22.
Right. It's a chapter just packed with action, isn't it? You've got this king's banquet, these tricky questions from opponents, some profound theological debates.
And Jesus even turns the tables on them.
Exactly. So our mission here really is to unpack these key stories, try to understand the challenging questions, and see the profound teachings woven through it all.
Yeah, it feels almost like a day in the life where Jesus is constantly being tested and revealing who he is and what his kingdom is actually about.
That's a good way to put it.
We'll look at the parable of the wedding banquet,
Yeah.
that infamous confrontation about paying taxes to Caesar,
Uh-huh.
the Sadducees trying to kind of ridicule the resurrection idea, the discussion on the greatest commandment.
And then finishing with Jesus asking his own challenging question about the Christ.
It really is a masterclass in, well, navigating conflict and getting right to the heart of things.
Absolutely. Okay, so where do we start?
Let's jump right in at the beginning of the chapter with the parable of the wedding banquet. Jesus kicks things off, comparing the kingdom of heaven to a king who's preparing this huge, lavish wedding feast for his son.
And this isn't just any dinner, right? It's a major royal event.
Hmm.
Signifies, immense joy, importance. So the king sends his servants out to the guests who were originally invited, the ones on the list.
But the text says it pretty starkly. They refuse to come. Just
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty incredible insult to a king, right? So he tries again, sends out more servants.
This time with more detail, trying to entice them.
Exactly. Like, hey, dinner's ready. My oxen, my fattened cattle, they've all been butchered. Everything is prepared. Come on down.
The table is set. You'd think that would work.
You would. But the reactions this time are even worse.
Yeah.
Some the text says they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business.
Just like, nah, too busy. Got other stuff to do. Mundane stuff.
Right, completely dismissed it. But others, they were actively hostile. They actually seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them.
Wow, so violence against the messengers themselves.
Yeah, it's a complete violent rejection of the king's invitation.
And that level of disrespect, that violence, it naturally brings the king's wrath down.
Oh, absolutely. The text tells us he was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city.
That's a severe consequence. It really shows the cost of rejecting the king's offer and harming his people.
Definitely. So with those initial guests now totally disqualified, the king's focus shifts completely.
Right. What does he do?
He tells his servants, look, the wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited, they didn't deserve to come. So go out, go to the street corners, and invite anyone you find.
Anyone. Just anyone off the street, no background check.
Seems like it. So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad.
Good and bad. Interesting mix.
And the wedding hall was filled with guests. So you've got this huge crowd, totally unexpected people filling the place. It feels like a major turning point in the parable.
It really does. But the story isn't quite over yet, is it?
No. The king comes in to see the guests, check out the party scene. And he spots one man who isn't wearing wedding clothes.
That detail about the clothes, it feels significant, doesn't it? What happens?
The king addresses him directly, but actually quite calmly at first. Friend, he asked, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?
And the man's response.
He's speechless, utterly silent. No explanation, no excuse.
And the king's reaction to this guy, it's just as harsh as before, right?
Exactly. He tells his attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Whoa. The same fate as the murderers, but just for not having the right clothes?
It seems so. And the parable wraps up with that really powerful, maybe chilling line. For many are invited, but few are chosen.
Okay, so let's unpack that. There are definite layers here. You've got the initial invitation, the violent rejection leading to judgment, then this wide open invitation to everyone, filling the hall.
Right.
And finally, this issue of the wedding clothes. What does that suggest? That simply, showing up isn't quite enough.
It seems like it implies that, that maybe there's an expected way to receive and honor the invitation. Perhaps the clothing symbolizes putting on a certain character or righteousness that's fitting for the king's presence.
So the invitation is incredibly generous, goes out really wide, even to people previously considered unworthy.
Absolutely.
But actually entering the kingdom, being part of the feast, seems to require something more than just being called, maybe a transformation or a preparation.
Sure.
Symbolized by the clothing.
That seems to be the implication. It shifts the focus, doesn't it?
Right.
From who was initially invited to who was ultimately prepared and accepted by the king. It's not just about getting the invite, but how you respond and prepare.
That's a powerful idea. Okay, so Jesus tells this really challenging parable, and then, boom, he's immediately confronted by opposition again.
Yes, the scene shifts pretty dramatically. The Pharisees, maybe feeling threatened or just wanting to discredit him, they went out and laid plans to trap him in his words.
They're actively trying to catch him out. How do they do it?
They send a very specific group, their disciples, to him along with the Herodians.
Herodians? So political people loyal to Herod, and by extension, Rome, teaming up with the religious Pharisees.
Exactly. Which is clever, or maybe cynical. It makes the question they're about to ask a perfect political and religious minefield.
Okay, so what's the setup?
Well, they start by kind of buttering him up.
Yeah.
Teacher, they say, we know you are a man of integrity. You teach the way of God truthfully. You aren't swayed by men. You pay no attention to who they are. Flattery.
All designed to make the trap question seem like a genuine inquiry.
Precisely. But Jesus, the text says, knows their evil intent. He sees right through it.
So what's the killer question?
Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?
The tax question, the ultimate trap.
Absolutely. If he says yes, pay the tax, he looks like a Roman collaborator to the Jewish people who hated Roman rule and the tax.
Right, he loses popular support.
But if he says no, don't pay it, well, then he's advising rebellion against imperial law. The Herodians right there could report him. He could be arrested.
It really seems like a no-win situation they've crafted.
It does. But Jesus, calling them hypocrites right off the bat, doesn't fall for it. He doesn't answer directly. Instead, he asks them for something.
What does he ask for?
Show me the coin used for paying the tax.
So they bring him a denarius.
The Roman coin.
Yeah.
The one used for the poll tax.
Right. And crucially, it would have had the emperor's image, his portrait, and his inscription on it. Titles claiming divinity often.
Okay, so he has the coin. Then what?
He asks them a simple question about the coin itself. Whose portrait is this? And whose inscription?
And they have to answer.
Caesar's. There's no other answer. And then comes the famous reply.
Then comes the reply. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's.
Wow. Just wow. What was their reaction?
The text says they were amazed, completely stunned. They had no comeback. They just left him and went away.
He totally disarmed them. So what's the core insight there? How did he navigate that so perfectly?
Well, he acknowledges the reality of earthly authority, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Caesar's government, Caesar's coin. There are obligations within that system. Give Caesar what belongs to him, what bears his image.
Okay.
But crucially, by immediately adding, and to God what is God's, he implies there's another sphere, something else, maybe ourselves, bearing God's image that belongs solely and ultimately to God.
So different spheres of obligation.
Exactly. It sets up this fundamental principle. We have civic duties, yes, but our ultimate allegiance, our very being, belongs to God. It doesn't reject earthly responsibility, but it puts it in its proper secondary place.
That's incredibly insightful, acknowledging one layer of reality while pointing firmly to a deeper, more important one. Okay, so he handles the Pharisees and Herodians, but the challenges aren't over for the day.
Not at all. That same day, the text says, the Sadducees came to him with a question.
And these guys are different from the Pharisees, right? What's their deal?
Yeah, they were often the more aristocratic, maybe rationalistic group. They held power in the temple, and crucially, they only really accepted the first 5 books of Moses, the Torah, as authoritative scripture.
And that meant?
That meant they rejected beliefs not explicitly laid out there like the resurrection of the dead or even angels and spirits. So their defining belief here is there is no resurrection.
Okay, so they come to Jesus, who does teach resurrection, presumably to challenge him on this point.
Precisely. They want to make the whole idea of resurrection sound illogical, even ridiculous. And they use a scenario based on a specific Mosaic law to do it.
Which law is that?
It's the law from Deuteronomy about levirate marriage. If a married man died without children, his brother was supposed to marry the widow to raise up offspring for the deceased brother. Keep the family line going.
Okay, so how do they use this law?
They concoct this, frankly, pretty elaborate and slightly absurd hypothetical story. Teacher, they say, Moses told us, and then they lay it out. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died childless, leaving his wife to his brother.
Okay, brother number 1.
The same thing happened to the second and third brother, right on down to the 7th. So this poor woman marries each brother in turn, and each one dies childless.
All 7 brothers. Wow.
Finally, the woman also died. End of scenario.
So the setup is complete. What's their zinger question?
Their code one, designed to expose what they see as the absurdity of resurrection, is, now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the seven, since all of them were married to her?
Right. They're assuming life after death is just like this life, with the same social structures like marriage, and trying to show it leads to impossible paradoxes.
Exactly. But Jesus immediately identifies their error. He tells them straight up, you are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God.
A double error. Not knowing scripture and not knowing God's power.
Right. They were fundamentally mistaken on both counts. First, he corrects their basic assumption about the resurrected state.
How so?
He says, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven.
So it's a completely different kind of existence, beyond our current social setups like marriage.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
The relationships, the way of being, will be transformed like the angels. It renders their question about whose wife completely moot because the premise is wrong.
Okay, that deals with the power of God's side, maybe. What about the scripture side? They prided themselves on knowing the Torah.
But Jesus delivers the knockout blow here, proving the resurrection from the very books of Moses they claim to exclusively follow.
From the Torah itself. How?
He quotes God speaking to Moses from the burning bush long after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had physically died. God says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
He says, I am, present tense.
Exactly. And Jesus draws out the profound implication. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living.
Wow. So if God is currently their God, centuries after they died physically.
It means Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must still be alive in some real sense, still in relationship with God. It implies ongoing existence beyond death.
That completely dismantles their argument using their own accepted scriptures and shows they hadn't understood the depth of those scriptures or the power of God to give life beyond the grave.
Perfectly put. And the crowd's listening. The text says they were astonished at his teaching. They recognized the brilliance and authority in his answer.
Yeah, it's amazing how he doesn't just answer their specific, narrow, kind of ridiculing question about the wife. He completely shifts the framework and reveals this much grander truth about life after death and God's ongoing relationship with his people.
Exactly. He reframed the whole thing and proved the resurrection's reality from their own text. Just masterful.
Okay, so the Sadducees are silenced. Now, the Pharisees hear about this, that Jesus shut down their theological rivals. What do?
Well, they regroup, they gather together, and one of them, an expert in the law, steps forward to test him again, but maybe on a different front this time, more about the heart of Jewish practice.
Right, not a trap necessarily, but a test of his understanding.
Seems like it. He asks a classic fundamental question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? You know, out of the hundreds of commandments in the Torah, which one is the most important? The paramount one.
A central question for any student of the law. How does Jesus answer?
He gives this incredibly concise and powerful two-part answer, bringing two distinct commands together. First, the greatest. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind.
It's just straight from Deuteronomy, right? The Shema, the core declaration of Israel's allegiance to God.
Yeah, exactly. Total devotion, heart, soul, mind, everything. But then he immediately adds the second command.
What's the second one?
He says, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself, which comes from Leviticus.
Like it. That phrase seems important. Why are these two commands linked? What makes loving your neighbor like loving God?
Well, it suggests they're inseparable, doesn't it? That genuine love for God, the vertical relationship, must express itself horizontally in how we treat others.
So you can't really claim to love the God you can't see if you don't love the neighbor you can see.
That seems to be the heart of it. Our relationship with the divine is intrinsically tied to our relationships with fellow humans. They aren't separate duties, they're two sides of the same coin, the foundation.
And Jesus makes that totally explicit with his summary statement, right?
Yes, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Everything else, every other rule, every prophetic message, it all finds its meaning and purpose as an expression or application of these two core principles.
Love God, absolutely, and love your neighbor as yourself.
It's this radical simplification, really, getting to the absolute core of the entire religious and ethical code. It boils everything down to those two foundational relationships, upward towards God and outward towards humanity.
It provides such a clear, unifying principle. Okay, so after this whole day of being constantly questioned, tested, peppered with traps, Jesus does something unexpected.
He does. While the Pharisees are still gathered there, maybe buzzing about his answers, he turns the dynamic completely around. He asks them a question.
Taking the initiative, what does he ask?
He asks them about the identity of the Messiah, the Christ. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?
A straightforward question, seemingly. What's their answer?
Their answer is the standard one, the scripturally expected one, the son of David.
Right, that was the common understanding. The Messiah would be a descendant of King David,
Right.
come to restore the kingdom.
Exactly. But Jesus doesn't leave it there. He pushes deeper, quoting Psalm 110, which was traditionally attributed to David himself.
Okay, what does he quote?
He asks them, how is it then that David, speaking by the Spirit, calls him Lord? And then he quotes the verse. The Lord, meaning God, said to my Lord, meaning the Messiah, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet.
So, God the Father, speaking to someone David, the supposed ancestor, calls my Lord.
Precisely. And that creates the puzzle Jesus lays out for them. If then David calls him Lord, how can he be his son?
How can David's descendant, his son, simultaneously be David's superior, his Lord?
Exactly. This question cuts right to the heart of the Messiah's nature. If the Christ is only a human descendant of David, a future king, then it makes no sense for David, his great ancestor, to call him Lord. That title implies superiority, authority, maybe even divinity.
So Jesus is using scripture they knew well, a psalm they revered.
To challenge their purely human, purely political understanding of the Messiah, he's strongly hinting that the Christ is something more than just a human king from David's line, maybe divine, pre-existent.
It's a deep theological challenge posed using their own texts. And what's the result? How did the Pharisees respond?
Complete silence. The text says no one could say a word in reply.
They had no answer.
None. He'd exposed a profound depth, maybe a paradox, in their own scriptures regarding the Messiah's identity that their standard view couldn't account for. And the effect was decisive. And from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions.
He completely silenced his questioners, not just answered them, but posed a question they couldn't handle.
Yes, he used their own accepted authority, the scriptures, to reveal a mystery about the Christ that went beyond their categories. It effectively ended that whole day's barrage of tests and traps.
What an absolutely incredible journey through just one chapter, Matthew 22. We saw Jesus use that challenging parable about the wedding feast.
Right, illustrating the kingdom, the call, the requirements.
Then brilliantly navigate those political and religious traps, the tax question, with just one insightful phrase.
Dismantling the Sadducees' argument against resurrection, using their own scripture, and clarifying the nature of the life to come.
Boiling down the entire weight of the law and prophets to just two core commands: love God, love neighbor.
Yeah.
And finally, turning the tables, using scripture to pose that profound, unanswerable question about the Messiah's identity that just silenced the experts.
It really is an amazing showcase of his wisdom, his authority, his ability to speak truth clearly and powerfully, even in really complex, hostile situations.
Yeah, he didn't just give, easy answers, did he? He often exposed the flawed thinking behind the questions or pointed towards a much deeper reality.
That's right. Whether he was facing hostility or trickery, or even what might seem like genuine inquiry, he consistently redirected attention towards God's kingdom, God's will, and ultimately his own identity.
It absolutely highlights why diving into the source material like this is so valuable. You find these incredible moments of insight, these really clever arguments, and just core truths about faith and life packed in there.
Every interaction reveals something significant.
So, thinking about everything we've unpacked from Matthew 22, the rejected invitations, the coin, the resurrected state, those two great commands, David's Lord, here's something maybe for you to chew on. How does Jesus's consistent ability to just cut through the noise, expose people's motives, and reveal deeper truth, how does that shape your understanding of what real wisdom and authority look like?
That's a great question to ponder.
And maybe also, what does it mean for us today when the text challenges our own assumptions, our own neat categories, just like it challenged the experts back then?